Pine Valley was the kind of town people dreamed about, a place where neighbors knew each other's names and weekends were spent at the high school football field. Nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, it looked like something out of a postcard. But appearances could be deceiving. Beneath the surface, a shadow had taken hold, suffocating the spirit of the town. The Iron Circle motorcycle gang ruled Pine Valley with an iron fist. They collected protection fees from small businesses, intimidated residents, and corrupted local officials. Those who stood up to them found their windows shattered, their businesses torched, or worse. Over time, resistance faded, and the people of Pine Valley learned to endure their quiet desperation. Robert "Bear" Wallace had chosen this town precisely because it seemed unremarkable. After retiring from the Marine Corps, he sought a place where he could live out his days in peace, far from the chaos of his past. He took a job as a janitor at Pine Valley High School, where the monotony of sweeping floors and fixing lockers gave him a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. Bear was a large man, his nickname earned during his time in the service. Broad-shouldered with a weathered face and silver streaks in his hair, he carried himself with quiet authority. Most people in town thought of him as a recluse, someone content to keep to himself. But at the high school, Bear had become a silent protector. He'd seen too many kids falling through the cracks, especially Tyler Reeves. Tyler was a wiry teenager with a mop of unruly hair and a permanent scowl. He'd been in trouble more times than Bear could count. Fistfights, skipping class, graffiti. Most of the teachers had given up on him, but Bear saw something else. Tyler's anger wasn't aimless. It was a shield, a reaction to a world that had let him down. One afternoon, as Bear mopped the empty hallways, he noticed Tyler sitting on the steps outside the gym, nursing a bruised hand. "Fighting again?" Bear asked, his voice low and steady. Tyler shrugged. "What's it to you?" Bear leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You're not as tough as you think, kid. Real strength isn't about throwing punches." Tyler glared at him, but something in Bear's calm demeanor made him pause. "What would you know about it?" Bear's eyes, filled with hard-earned wisdom, locked onto Tyler's. "More than you think." That conversation was brief, but it planted a seed. Bear didn't expect an immediate turnaround, but he saw the potential in Tyler, potential he wasn't ready to give up on. The next day, Bear stopped by Clara's diner, the heart of Pine Valley. Clara, a widow in her 50s, ran the place with a smile that belied her struggles. Business had been slow lately, thanks to the Iron Circle's fees. "Morning, Bear," Clara greeted as he slid into his usual booth. "Coffee, please." As Clara poured his coffee, the bell over the door jingled, and 3 members of the Iron Circle swaggered in. They were all leather vests, tattoos, and bad intentions. The leader, Rick "Viper" Kane, scanned the room before walking up to Clara. "Morning, Clara," Viper said, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "We're here for your monthly contribution." Clara's hand trembled as she placed the coffee pot down. Business has been slow. I need more time." Viper leaned in close, his smile razor-sharp. "We all need things, Clara, but you know how this works. Pay up, or we make an example of you." Bear watched the exchange in silence, his jaw tightening. When Viper reached for Clara's wrist, Bear stood. "That's enough," he said, his voice like gravel. The diner fell silent. Viper turned, amused. "And who are you supposed to be? Her bodyguard?" "Just a customer," Bear replied evenly. "But I don't like bullies." Viper's smile faltered for a moment before he laughed. "Big guys got a hero complex, huh? Listen, old man, this isn't your business." Bear took a step forward, his presence commanding. "It is now." The tension crackled like static. Viper sized him up, but something in Bear's calm confidence gave him pause. After a long moment, he nodded to his men. "Let's go. Clara knows the deal." The gang left, but not without a warning. Viper pointed a finger at Bear. "You'll regret this." Later that evening, Bear found his truck vandalized, tires slashed, windows shattered. It was a message, loud and clear, but it wasn't fear that filled Bear as he surveyed the damage. It was anger, not the kind that clouded judgment, but the kind that focused it. As he walked back to his small house on the edge of town, Bear replayed the encounter in his mind. The Iron Circle thrived because they'd broken the spirit of Pine Valley. They'd made the people believe they had no choice but to comply. But Bear had seen what courage could do. He'd seen broken men rise to unimaginable challenges and communities rebuild after devastation. He wasn't naive enough to think he could take on the Iron Circle alone, but he also couldn't stand by and do nothing. In his garage, Bear pulled out a wooden chest. Inside were remnants of his military past, medals, a worn journal, and an old pair of dog tags. He ran his fingers over the cold metal, his jaw tightening. "This isn't over," he murmured. The next day, Bear returned to the high school. He found Tyler waiting outside the gym again, this time with fresh bruises. "Rough night?" Bear asked. Tyler shrugged but didn't walk away. "Ever think about using that energy for something productive?" Tyler gave him a skeptical look. "Like what?" Bear smirked. "Come by my place after school. I'll show you." It wasn't just Tyler that Bear had in mind. Over the next few weeks, he began quietly reaching out to others in Pine Valley, people who'd suffered under the Iron Circle but hadn't yet lost hope. Clara, Eric, Pastor James, and even Marcus, an old friend who had returned to town as a detective. Together, they could start something. For Bear, it wasn't just about fighting back. It was about showing Pine Valley that they didn't have to live in fear anymore. And so, the quiet war began. The Iron Circle's grip on Pine Valley was like a tightening noose. Businesses handed over cash with trembling hands, and the sheriff's office turned a blind eye. It was an unspoken rule. You paid, you survived. For years, the people had endured in silence, but Robert "Bear" Wallace was about to change that. Bear wasn't a man of flashy speeches or grand gestures. His battles had always been fought quietly, with precision and purpose. He understood that wars weren't won overnight. They were won in moments, one small victory at a time. At Clara's diner, Bear met with Marcus Reed, an old friend who had recently returned to Pine Valley. Marcus had been a rising star in the police force before transferring to a bigger city, but something had pulled him back, perhaps unfinished business or a desire to make things right. Sitting across from Bear in the diner's back booth, Marcus scanned the room, his sharp eyes noting every detail. "You've got a death wish, Bear," he said, sipping his coffee. Bear shook his head. "I'm not looking for trouble. Trouble found me. I just don't want these people to keep living like this." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "You think you're the first person to stand up to them? The Iron Circle doesn't just run Pine Valley. They own it. The sheriff, the mayor, they're all on Kane's payroll. Then we work around them," Bear said firmly. Marcus studied his friend for a long moment. Bear had always been the steady one, the rock in chaotic situations. But now, Marcus saw something more. A man unwilling to let fear dictate his actions. "All right," Marcus said finally. "I'll help. But if we're going to do this, we do it smart. No reckless heroics." Bear nodded. "That's the only way I know." While Marcus began quietly investigating the Iron Circle's operations, Bear focused on the people. He started with Tyler Reeves, the teenager with a chip on his shoulder and more bruises than he'd admit. Tyler showed up at Bear's house after school, skeptical but curious. "What is this place?" Tyler asked, eyeing the cluttered garage. "My workshop," Bear said. "And your first lesson." Bear handed Tyler a worn punching bag and hung it from the ceiling. "Start here." Tyler scoffed. "You want me to hit a bag? How's that going to help anything?" Bear didn't respond. He simply stepped aside and motioned for Tyler to begin. The boy threw a few half-hearted punches, more for show than anything else. "Not like that," Bear said, stepping behind him. "Control your breathing. Focus. Punch with purpose, not anger." It took time, but Tyler slowly started to get it. As his punches grew stronger, Bear began to talk. "You've got a lot of energy, Tyler. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Use it to destroy, or use it to protect?" Tyler didn't answer right away, but something about Bear's words stayed with him. Bear's next stop was Clara's diner. Over the past week, Clara had been visibly shaken since the Iron Circle's visit. The gang's threats lingered in her mind like a storm cloud, but Bear had a way of calming the storm. "You're not alone in this," Bear told her as she refilled his coffee. Clara sighed. It's hard to believe that when every time I turn around, they're there, watching, waiting. Bear placed a reassuring hand on hers. We're going to change that, but I need your help. People listen to you, Clara. If you can show them that standing up is possible, it'll spread. Clara hesitated, but eventually nodded. What do you need me to do? Keep being you, Bear said, and trust that we're stronger than they think. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly to uncover the Iron Circle's network. His first lead came from a reluctant source, a young man named Danny, who had once run with the gang but had since tried to turn his life around. They've got deals running out of the old freight yard, Danny whispered, nervously glancing around the empty diner where Marcus had arranged to meet him. Drugs, guns, you name it. But if they find out I talked, I'm dead. You did the right thing, Marcus assured him. We'll keep you safe. But Marcus knew this information was only the tip of the iceberg. The freight yard was important, but it wasn't enough to bring the gang down. Bear's quiet campaign continued to gain momentum. He began organizing late-night meetings at his home, inviting people he trusted, Clara, Tyler, Danny, and a few others who had reached their breaking points with the Iron Circle. We're not here to start a war, Bear told the group one evening. We're here to remind them that this town belongs to us, not them. But it only works if we stick together. The meetings were small at first, but word began to spread. More people came, bringing stories of how the Iron Circle had hurt them and ideas for how they could fight back. Bear listened to every voice, understanding that unity would be their greatest weapon. The Iron Circle wasn't blind to the growing resistance. Viper Kane sat in the gang's clubhouse, listening as his lieutenants reported strange activity. Residents talking in hushed tones, less willingness to comply with their demands. It's that janitor, one of them sneered. The big guy from the diner. He's stirring people up. Kane leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Let him. People like him always burn out. And when they do, we'll make an example of him. But Bear wasn't burning out. He was just getting started. One night, he and Marcus put their first plan into action. Using Danny's information, they staked out the freight yard, watching as Iron Circle members unloaded crates from a truck. Bear's heart pounded as he signaled to Marcus. It was time. The two men approached silently, their movements honed by years of training. Marcus disabled the truck while Bear slashed the tires of the gang's motorcycles. When the gang members returned, they found their vehicles incapacitated and the shipment compromised. It wasn't a major blow, but it was a message. The Iron Circle's grip on Pine Valley wasn't as unshakable as they thought. In the weeks that followed, Bear's efforts began to pay off. Tyler's confidence grew as he trained under Bear's guidance, channeling his anger into purpose. Clara found her voice, rallying other business owners to stand with her. And Marcus continued to chip away at the gang's operations, exposing cracks in their foundation. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in years, Pine Valley felt hope. And for Bear, that was worth fighting for. The freight yard incident had sent a clear message to the Iron Circle. Pine Valley wasn't entirely theirs anymore. While the gang didn't know exactly who was responsible, suspicion festered among them like a slow-burning fire. Robert "Bear" Wallace, however, knew that his small victory would provoke a reaction, and the town would have to be ready. Bear sat in his garage, the faint smell of motor oil and sawdust hanging in the air. Tyler Reeves was there, wrapping his hands for another training session. Over the past few weeks, the teenager had become a regular fixture in Bear's life. He was no longer the angry, aimless kid who sneered at authority. While the chip on his shoulder hadn't disappeared, it was now paired with a budding sense of purpose. I heard some of the other kids talking, Tyler said as he adjusted the wraps around his knuckles. They think you're crazy for going up against the Iron Circle. Do you? Bear asked, his voice steady. Tyler shrugged. I think it's about time someone did. Bear nodded, pleased with the response. He motioned to the heavy bag hanging from the ceiling. Show me what you've got. Tyler unleashed a flurry of punches, his form improving with every hit. Bear watched silently, correcting his stance when needed, but letting the boy find his rhythm. After a few minutes, Tyler stepped back, breathing heavily. What's next? Bear tossed him a jump rope. Endurance. You don't win a fight by throwing wild punches. You win by outlasting your opponent. As Tyler began jumping, Bear's phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Marcus Reed. "We've got a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "Meet me at Clara's." Clara's diner was quieter than usual when Bear arrived. The lunch rush had come and gone, leaving the place in a lull. Marcus sat in their usual booth, a thick file folder in front of him. He looked up as Bear slid into the seat across from him. "What's going on?" Bear asked. Marcus opened the folder, revealing photographs and notes. "These are from Danny," he said, referring to the former Iron Circle member who had been feeding them information. "Kane's escalating. They're bringing in reinforcements, guys from out of town who are even worse than the regulars." Bear studied the photos, his jaw tightening. The men in the images were hardened, their faces etched with years of violence. "They're planning something big," Marcus continued. "Danny says they're consolidating their control. They know people are pushing back, and they want to crush it before it gets out of hand." Bear leaned back, his mind racing. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Marcus said grimly. "Maybe a week." Bear nodded, his thoughts already turning to strategy. He'd known this fight would escalate, but the stakes were higher than ever now. That evening, Bear called another meeting at his house. The group that gathered was larger than before. Clara, Tyler, Danny, and a few others who had quietly joined their cause. "We've got intel that the Iron Circle is bringing in reinforcements," Bear began, addressing the group. "They're planning to make an example of this town." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. "So what do we do?" Clara asked. "We prepare," Bear said firmly. "This isn't about fighting them head-on. It's about showing them that we're not afraid, that we won't back down." He outlined a plan. Small acts of defiance that would disrupt the gang's operations without putting anyone in unnecessary danger. Cutting off their supplies, sabotaging their vehicles, and continuing to gather evidence that Marcus could use to build a case against them. Tyler spoke up, his voice steady. "What about the people who are too scared to fight back? How do we get them on board?" Bear looked at the boy, impressed by the question. "We show them it's possible. Courage spreads, Tyler. But it starts with us." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Bear and Marcus worked tirelessly to identify weak points in the Iron Circle's network. Clara and Danny coordinated with local business owners, urging them to stand together. Tyler, for his part, threw himself into training, determined to prove he could hold his own if it came to that. One night, Bear and Marcus made their way to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. It was one of the gang's key supply depots, where they kept everything from weapons to contraband. "Ready?" Marcus asked as they crouched behind a row of bushes. Bear nodded. "Let's move." The two men moved silently, their military training evident in every step. They disabled the security cameras and cut the locks on the doors, working quickly to disable as much of the gang's stockpile as possible. As they slipped away into the night, Bear felt a flicker of satisfaction. Each small victory chipped away at the Iron Circle's dominance. But the gang was quick to retaliate. The next morning, Tyler arrived at Bear's house, his face pale. "They hit the Jenkins farm last night," he said, his voice shaking. Bear's stomach sank. The Jenkins family had been vocal about their refusal to pay the Iron Circle's fees. Now, their barn was nothing but ashes. "It's a warning," Bear said grimly. "They want the town to know what happens when you resist." "Then we hit back harder," Tyler said, fire in his eyes. Bear placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This isn't about revenge, Tyler. It's about sending a message. We fight smart, not reckless." As the week wore on, tensions in Pine Valley reached a boiling point. The Iron Circle's reinforcements began to arrive, their presence a dark cloud over the town. But Bear's group didn't falter. One night, Clara stood up at a town meeting, her voice trembling but determined. "We've been living in fear for too long," she said. "It's time we remember that this is our town, not theirs." Her words sparked something in the crowd. Slowly, more people began to voice their support, their courage bolstered by the growing resistance. By the end of the week, Bear's small acts of defiance had begun to take a toll on the Iron Circle. Their supply lines were disrupted, their operations sabotaged. And though they lashed out in response, the town's newfound unity made it harder for them to maintain their grip. But Bear knew the real test was still to come. Kane wouldn't let this challenge go unanswered. The Iron Circle leader would strike back with everything he had. As Bear stood on his porch that evening, watching the sunset over Pine Valley, he felt a quiet resolve. The fight was far from over, but they were ready. And for the first time in years, the town wasn't facing the darkness alone. The tension in Pine Valley had reached a fever pitch. Each act of defiance against the Iron Circle had emboldened the townspeople, but it also painted a target on their backs. The gang was a wounded predator now, angrier, more desperate, and far more dangerous. Robert "Bear" Wallace stood at the edge of town, watching as another wave of motorcycles roared in from the highway. The reinforcements were younger, leaner, and carried an air of violence like a storm cloud. Viper Kane, the Iron Circle's leader, was clearly preparing for an all-out assault on Pine Valley's fragile resistance. Bear turned to Marcus Reed, who stood beside him, scanning the newcomers. The former detective's jaw was tight, his hand resting near the holster at his side. "It's going to get ugly, isn't it?" Marcus asked. Bear nodded, his voice steady. "It already is." The Iron Circle wasted no time. That night, the gang hit the Pine Valley General Store, ransacking it and leaving behind broken windows and spray-painted warnings. The next morning, Clara's diner found its front door glued shut and its windows cracked. "They're testing us," Marcus said as he surveyed the damage at the diner. "Seeing how far they can push before we break." "We won't break," Bear replied firmly. "But we need to be smart. This isn't just about standing up to them. It's about outlasting them." Bear gathered his group that evening at his house. The room was packed now, with more residents than he'd ever expected. Clara sat near the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tyler was perched on the edge of a chair, his restless energy barely contained. Danny, the former gang member, stood by the wall, his arms crossed, his eyes darting nervously. "They've escalated," Bear began, his voice calm but commanding. "We knew this was coming, but we're not backing down. We've come too far to let fear win now." "What do we do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling but resolute. Bear glanced at Marcus, who stepped forward with a map in hand. He spread it out on the table, pointing to key locations. "We know their weak points. The freight yard is still critical to their operations, and they're using the old junkyard as a meeting spot. We can disrupt both." "And then what?" Tyler interjected. "They'll just hit back harder." Bear turned to the teenager, his expression serious. "That's why we're not just fighting them with sabotage. We're fighting them by showing this town that we're stronger together. Every time they hit us, we rebuild. Every time they scare us, we stand taller." Tyler nodded, but his jaw remained tight. Over the next 2 days, Bear's group put their plan into action. Clara and other business owners boarded up their shops but refused to stop operating. They worked together, watching each other's backs and keeping spirits high. At the same time, Marcus and Bear led quiet missions to disrupt the Iron Circle's activities. One night, they struck the junkyard. Under the cover of darkness, Bear and Marcus snuck in, disabling motorcycles and scattering supplies. They left behind a single message painted in red, "This is our town." The gang found the vandalism the next morning, their rage spilling into the streets. Viper Kane gathered his men at the bar they used as a makeshift headquarters, slamming his fist onto the table. "Enough games," he growled. "If this town wants war, we'll give it to them." That night, the Iron Circle launched their most aggressive attack yet. They hit 3 locations in quick succession: a farm, a hardware store, and the high school. Windows shattered, vehicles were torched, and threatening graffiti appeared on every wall. Bear and Marcus worked tirelessly to contain the damage, but the mood in Pine Valley was dark. People were scared, and for the first time, Bear could feel doubt creeping in. "It's working," Tyler said as they surveyed the damage at the high school. "They're breaking us." "No," Bear replied firmly. "They're trying to. There's a difference." Bear's words were put to the test the next day when Kane made his boldest move yet. The gang leaders stormed into Clara's diner with half a dozen men, their presence suffocating the small space. Kane leaned on the counter, flashing Clara a wolfish grin. "Nice place you've got here," he said, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "Be a shame if something happened to it." Clara didn't flinch, though her hands trembled as she poured coffee. "What do you want?" Kane smirked. I want you to tell that janitor friend of yours to back off. He's playing a dangerous game, and it's going to cost this town more than it's worth. Bear entered the diner just as Kane finished speaking. He didn't say a word at first, letting his imposing presence speak for itself. Kane turned, his grin faltering slightly as he sized up the retired Marine. This is the part where you leave, Bear said calmly. Kane laughed, but it was forced. You've got guts, old man. I'll give you that. But guts only get you so far. Bear took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Kane's. You don't scare me, Kane, and you won't scare this town much longer. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, the tension crackling like a live wire. Then, with a smirk, Kane motioned for his men to leave. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. As the gang roared away on their motorcycles, Bear turned to Clara. You all right? She nodded, though her face was pale. I'll be fine. But they won't stop, Bear. Not until they destroy everything. They'll try, Bear admitted, but they won't succeed. That evening, Bear called another meeting. The crowd was larger than ever, but the mood was heavy. People were scared, and doubt lingered in the air. Bear stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding attention. I know you're scared, he began. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. But fear doesn't have to control us. The Iron Circle wants us to believe we're weak, that we can't stand up to them. But look around. Every person in this room is proof that they're wrong. His words carried weight, and slowly, the doubt began to fade. We've taken the first steps, Bear continued. Now it's time to finish what we started. They may have numbers, but we have something stronger. We have each other. The room erupted in quiet determination. As the meeting ended, Bear caught Tyler lingering by the door. You did good today, Bear said. Tyler shrugged, his usual bravado replaced with something more genuine. It's not over yet. No, Bear agreed, but we're ready for whatever comes next. And they would be, because Pine Valley wasn't just a town anymore. It was a community united by courage, ready to stand against the darkness. The chill of early morning crept into Pine Valley as Robert Bear Wallace prepared for what he knew would be a defining day. The Iron Circle's latest attack had shaken the town, but it had also hardened their resolve. He could see it in the determined faces of the people who had gathered at his house the night before. Clara, Tyler, Marcus, Danny, and now more than 20 others. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, stood united against the gang's reign of terror. But Bear knew unity wasn't enough. They needed strategy. By mid-morning, Bear and Marcus were parked in an unmarked truck just outside the Iron Circle's bar, where the gang had been meeting. They had spent weeks observing the gang's movements, and today was no different. They're gearing up for something, Marcus said, pointing to a truck being loaded with crates. Two gang members stood watch, rifles slung across their backs. Guns, probably, Bear replied. They're preparing to escalate. We need to hit them before they do. Marcus nodded grimly. If they arm up, we'll lose any chance of holding the town together. Bear looked at his friend, his voice low but resolute. We don't have the numbers to stop them outright. But if we take away their firepower, we level the playing field. That evening, the group gathered in Bear's garage. The air was tense, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. Bear spread out a map of the town, marking key locations with a red pin. They're storing weapons in that bar, he explained. We don't have time to wait for the police to act. Tonight, we go in and neutralize their stockpile. A murmur of concern rippled through the group. What if we're caught? Clara asked. Bear looked around the room, his gaze steady. This isn't about being heroes. It's about survival. If we don't act now, they'll have the firepower to take this town apart piece by piece. Tyler spoke up, his voice laced with determination. I'm in. Bear nodded, but he turned to Marcus. You stay back. If this goes south, someone needs to be here to pick up the pieces. Marcus frowned but didn't argue. He knew Bear was right. The night was moonless, the perfect cover for what Bear had planned. He, Tyler, and Danny approached the bar on foot, moving through the shadows like ghosts. The sound of muffled voices and faint laughter drifted from inside. Danny led the way, his familiarity with the gang's routines proving invaluable. They slipped around to the back, where a rusty steel door led to the storage room. Bear signaled for Tyler to stand guard while he and Danny worked on the lock. Within moments, the door creaked open, revealing rows of crates stacked high. Bear pried one open, revealing boxes of ammunition and several semi-automatic rifles. "Jackpot," Danny whispered. Bear nodded, pulling a small canister from his bag. "Let's move fast. This place is going to burn." Danny hesitated. "You sure about this?" Bear's voice was firm. "We're not taking lives, but we're not letting them use these weapons against us, either." They placed the canisters strategically, each one rigged to ignite with a remote detonator. As they worked, the tension grew thick. Every noise from outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through Bear's veins. When the last canister was in place, Bear motioned for Tyler and Danny to retreat. They slipped out the way they'd come, disappearing into the night just as a gang member stepped out for a smoke. From a safe distance, Bear pulled the remote from his pocket. The bar loomed dark and quiet against the horizon. "Ready?" he asked. Danny and Tyler nodded. Bear pressed the button. The explosion wasn't deafening, but it was loud enough to send a clear message. Flames erupted from the back of the bar, consuming the weapon's cache in a matter of moments. "That's going to hurt them," Tyler said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. "It's only the beginning," Bear replied. The Iron Circle's response was swift and brutal. By morning, the gang had descended on Pine Valley like a swarm. They smashed windows, slashed tires, and left graffiti across storefronts. But instead of cowering, the townspeople pushed back. Clara and a group of volunteers repainted the graffiti before noon. Farmers armed with shotguns patrolled their land. Even the high school students, emboldened by Tyler's leadership, organized cleanup efforts to erase the gang's damage. The Iron Circle wasn't just fighting Bear anymore. They were fighting the entire town. Viper Kane was furious. He stood in the wreckage of the bar, his fists clenched as his men reported the loss of their weapons. "We find out who did this," he snarled, "and we make an example of them." "Got a lead," one of the men said, handing Kane a photo. It was a grainy image from a security camera near the freight yard. It showed Bear and Marcus tampering with a lock. Kane's lip curled into a predatory grin. "So, the old man wants to play hero. Let's see how he handles it when the fight comes to him." That evening, Marcus burst into Bear's house, his face pale. "They know, Bear," he said, holding up a printout of the photo. "Kane's coming for you." Bear's expression didn't change. He had expected this. "Then we're ready," he said simply. Tyler, who had been listening from the kitchen, stepped forward. "What do we do?" Bear looked at the teenager, his voice steady. "We don't wait. We take the fight to them." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Bear's group fortified key locations in the town, creating makeshift barricades and setting up patrols. Marcus worked with a small team to secure evidence that could be turned over to the state police, ensuring that even if Pine Valley fell, the Iron Circle's crimes wouldn't go unpunished. As midnight approached, Bear stood with Tyler and Marcus on the edge of town, watching as headlights appeared on the horizon. "They're coming," Marcus said. Bear's jaw tightened. "Then let's show them what this town is made of." The battle lines were drawn. Pine Valley was ready to defend itself, no matter the cost. The Iron Circle thought they were fighting a small resistance, but they were about to learn that a united town was more powerful than any gang. And Bear Wallace would make sure they never forgot it. The air was thick with tension as the Iron Circle's convoy of motorcycles and trucks rolled into Pine Valley under the cover of night. Their engines roared like thunder, their headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the quiet town like a predator stalking its prey. At the front of the convoy rode Viper Kane, his face a mask of fury and determination. On the outskirts of Pine Valley, Bear Wallace stood with Marcus Reed and a handful of townspeople behind a makeshift barricade of farm equipment and sandbags. Tyler held a flashlight, signaling to their patrols stationed across town. Clara had taken shelter with the other non-combatants in the church basement, which had been reinforced as a safe zone. Bear turned to Marcus. "They'll hit hard and fast. Stick to the plan, no matter what." Marcus nodded grimly. "We've got this." The first wave came without warning. A group of gang members tried to blitz the barricade, but Bear's team was ready. Floodlights flickered on, blinding the riders as Tyler triggered a makeshift alarm system rigged to the town's old PA speakers. "Hold your positions," Bear barked, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. Shotgun blasts echoed as farmers and shopkeepers defended their ground. Buckshot ripped through the tires of the approaching motorcycles, sending them skidding into ditches. The gang's initial charge faltered, forcing them to retreat and regroup. Kane sat on his idling bike, watching the failed assault with cold eyes. "They want to fight," he growled. "Let's give them one." The second attack came from the east, targeting the high school where Tyler's group had stationed themselves. Kane had sent his men in trucks, attempting to breach the gymnasium, which served as another key stronghold. Inside, Tyler and his friends waited nervously, their weapons a mix of hunting rifles and baseball bats. When the trucks appeared, Tyler steeled himself. "Get ready," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. As the trucks rammed into the schoolyard fence, Tyler triggered another alarm system. Bright lights flooded the area, and reinforcements arrived from nearby buildings. The gang members were met with fierce resistance, and after a tense skirmish, they were forced to retreat. Tyler collapsed against a wall, breathing heavily. He had held the line, but he knew the night was far from over. Back at the barricade, Bear and Marcus braced for the gang's next move. They could hear the motorcycles circling, the gang looking for a weakness. "They're testing us," Marcus said, scanning the perimeter. Bear nodded. "Let them. Every second they waste here gives the rest of the town time to prepare." Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the freight yard. Bear's heart sank. That was where Danny and a few others had been stationed. "I'll go," Marcus said. "Already moving." Bear grabbed his arm. "Be careful. They'll expect us to split up." Marcus flashed a grim smile. "That's why I'll surprise them." At the freight yard, Danny and his small team were pinned down. The gang had come in force, using the cover of the abandoned railcars to stage their attack. Danny fired back with his hunting rifle, but the odds were against them. "Hold on," Marcus shouted as he arrived, his gun blazing. His sudden arrival turned the tide, forcing the gang to scatter. Danny exhaled in relief as Marcus crouched beside him. "Thought you weren't coming," Danny said, his voice shaky. "I don't leave my people behind," Marcus replied. "Let's fall back. This place isn't worth dying over." The two men retreated, regrouping with Bear's main force just as the gang launched their largest assault yet. The battle for Pine Valley was in full swing. The Iron Circle had split into multiple groups, each one targeting different parts of the town. At the church, Clara and the others heard the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions, their fear palpable. But instead of despair, Clara found strength in the people around her. "We're not helpless," she said, her voice firm. "We've come too far to lose now." The townspeople began organizing supplies, preparing to treat the wounded and reinforce the defenders. They weren't soldiers, but they were a community, and that made them stronger than the Iron Circle could ever understand. As dawn approached, the tide began to turn. The gang was running out of steam, their assaults becoming more desperate. Bear and Marcus regrouped with Tyler and his team, each man battered but unbroken. "They're losing," Marcus said. "They just don't know it yet." Bear nodded, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. "Let's finish this." With the remaining townspeople rallying behind them, Bear led the final push. They drove the gang back street by street, forcing them to abandon their vehicles and retreat into the woods. Kane was the last to fall back, his fury giving way to grim realization. Pine Valley wasn't just a town. It was a fortress of unshakable resolve. By the time the sun rose, the battle was over. The streets were littered with debris, but the town still stood. Exhausted but victorious, the townspeople gathered at the church where Clara and her team had been waiting. Bear addressed them, his voice filled with pride. "We did it. Not because we're stronger than them, but because we're stronger together." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the morning air. Far from the town, Kane regrouped with his remaining men. They were battered, demoralized, and fractured. "This isn't over," Kane snarled, but even he could feel the truth in his words. The Iron Circle was broken, and Pine Valley had won. As the town began to rebuild, Bear sat with Marcus and Tyler on the steps of the church, surveying the damage. "We've bought ourselves some peace," Marcus said. "For now," Bear replied. "But peace is something we'll have to keep fighting for." Tyler looked at Bear, his eyes filled with admiration. "We'll be ready." Bear nodded, his gaze steady. "We always will be." The morning after the Iron Circle's retreat, Pine Valley was a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. The battle had left scars, shattered windows, burned fences, and battered storefronts. But the people who walked through the town carried themselves with a newfound strength. They had survived. They had won. Bear Wallace stood in the town square, directing cleanup efforts. His shoulders were heavy with fatigue, but his voice remained steady, giving instructions to anyone who asked. Clara and a small group of volunteers worked tirelessly to patch up the diner, while Tyler and his friends collected debris from the high school. "You think they'll come back?" Marcus asked, stepping up beside Bear. "They'll think about it," Bear replied. "But they're too broken to be a real threat anymore. Not after what we just showed them." That afternoon, a meeting was held at the church, which had become Pine Valley's unofficial command center. Nearly everyone in town attended, their faces a mixture of pride and concern. Bear stood at the front of the room, flanked by Marcus, Clara, and Tyler. He surveyed the crowd before speaking. "We've done something incredible," Bear began, his voice carrying the weight of what they had achieved. "We stood together when it mattered most. We showed them that this town isn't just a place to be bullied or taken. It's our home." The crowd murmured in agreement, some breaking into applause. "But this isn't the end," Bear continued. "We've won the battle, but we need to think about what comes next. Rebuilding isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about making this town stronger than ever." Clara stepped forward, her voice warm and steady. "We've already started. We've shown we can come together. Now let's keep that going. Let's look out for one another, keep our businesses open, and make sure no one here feels alone." Tyler spoke next, his youthful determination inspiring the room. "We've got to stay ready. If they come back, or if someone else tries to take what we've built, we need to be stronger. Together." As the meeting concluded, the townspeople dispersed to their tasks, reinvigorated. Marcus approached Bear, his expression thoughtful. "You really think they're gone for good?" Marcus asked. Bear shook his head. "No, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that they know what's waiting for them if they try to come back." Meanwhile, in the woods outside Pine Valley, Viper Kane was holding a tense meeting with the remnants of the Iron Circle. The gang was in shambles. Half their members had abandoned them, their vehicles were destroyed, and their morale was shattered. "This isn't over," Kane growled, pacing in front of the small group that remained loyal to him. "They think they've won, but we'll remind them who they're dealing with." One of his lieutenants, a wiry man named Rocco, shook his head. "They're not scared of us anymore, Kane. That town's different. Stronger." Kane's eyes burned with fury. "So we make them scared again." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Back in Pine Valley, Danny sat on the steps of the church, staring at the horizon. Bear joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "You've been quiet," Bear said. Danny sighed. "Just thinking. This was my life, you know? The gangs, the violence. It's all I've ever known." Bear sat beside him. "And now?" Danny hesitated. "Now I see there's something better. What you've built here. It's not perfect, but it's real. I didn't think I'd ever want to be part of something like this." Bear patted his shoulder. "You're a big part of why we won, Danny. Don't forget that." As the sun set, the town gathered at Clara's diner for a shared meal. It wasn't a celebration, exactly, but a moment to breathe and appreciate what they'd accomplished. The sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the fear and chaos of the previous nights. Tyler sat with his friends at one table, their faces lit with excitement as they recounted their part in the defense. Clara moved from table to table, serving pie and coffee with a smile. At a table near the window, Marcus and Bear discussed their next steps. "The sheriff's office is sending a formal report to the state police," Marcus said. "They're promising to keep an eye on us." Bear nodded. "Good. But we can't rely on them completely. We need to stay vigilant." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. You're starting to sound like a real leader. Bear shook his head. I'm just an old man who didn't want to see his town destroyed. The real leaders are all around us. That night, as the town settled into an uneasy calm, Cain made his move. Under the cover of darkness, he and a few loyalists crept back into Pine Valley. They weren't here for another fight. They were here for revenge. Their target was the church, where they knew supplies and evidence against them were stored. As they approached, the sound of footsteps made Cain freeze. From the shadows, Marcus emerged, shotgun in hand. Looking for something? Marcus asked, his voice cold. Cain sneered. Just passing through. Behind Marcus, Bear and Danny appeared, flanking him. This is your last chance, Cain, Bear said, his voice low and firm. Leave, and don't come back. For a moment, Cain considered fighting, but the sight of the three men, and the knowledge that the entire town was ready, made him hesitate. With a snarl, he backed away, signaling his men to follow. This isn't over, Cain spat. Yes, it is, Bear replied. By morning, the iron circle had vanished. The townspeople woke to a quiet Pine Valley, and for the first time in weeks, there was no fear in the air. As Bear walked through the streets, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The fight wasn't over, not completely, but for now, Pine Valley was safe. And he knew, deep in his heart, that as long as the town stood together, they always would be. The morning sunlight poured over Pine Valley, bathing the town in warm gold and casting long shadows on the now silent streets. The scars of the battle remained. Shattered windows, scorched fences, and hastily repaired storefronts. But the spirit of the town had never been stronger. Bear Wallace stood on the steps of the church, watching as people moved about with purpose. Some repaired buildings, others swept debris from the streets, while children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the air. The resilience of Pine Valley was on full display. Feels like a different place, Marcus said, stepping up beside Bear. It is, Bear replied. We've changed, and not just because we want to fight. We've remembered what we're capable of when we stand together. At Clara's diner, a small crowd had gathered for breakfast. The atmosphere was lively, filled with conversations about rebuilding and plans for the future. Clara moved between tables, serving coffee and plates of eggs and bacon, her smile bright despite the fatigue visible in her eyes. I can't believe how far we've come, she said to Tyler, who was helping clear plates. Tyler nodded, his expression proud. We did it, Clara. All of us. And we're not going back. At a nearby table, Danny sat with some of the younger townsfolk, his demeanor lighter than it had been in weeks. So, what's next for you, Danny? One of them asked. Danny hesitated, then smiled. I think I'm staying. Feels like I've found something worth being a part of here. Clara overheard and gave him an approving nod. Good. We need people like you. Later that afternoon, Bear called for a town meeting in the square. People gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Bear stood in the center, flanked by Marcus, Clara, and Tyler. We've been through hell, Bear began, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. But we came out stronger. We've proven that Pine Valley isn't just a town, it's a family. And families protect each other. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. But this isn't the end of the story, Bear continued. If we want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, we have to keep building, keep standing together. And we have to help others do the same. Marcus stepped forward. We're setting up a community patrol system. Volunteers will help keep an eye on things and report anything suspicious. It's about keeping the peace, not starting fights. Clara added, and we're organizing resources to help rebuild faster. If anyone needs help, whether it's fixing a roof or restocking supplies, let us know. Finally, Tyler spoke, his youthful energy infectious. This is our home, and we're going to make it better than ever, stronger than ever. The crowd broke into applause, their determination renewed. Meanwhile, far from Pine Valley, Viper Kane sat alone in a rundown motel room. His gang was gone, scattered after their defeat, and the power he once wielded had evaporated. He stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror, haunted by the memory of the town's resistance. They weren't supposed to fight back, he muttered to himself. They weren't supposed to win. But they had, and Kane knew he had no one to blame but himself. Back in Pine Valley, the rebuilding effort gained momentum. Volunteers worked late into the night, repairing fences and repainting storefronts. The high school students organized fundraisers to help pay for damages, while local farmers donated supplies to those in need. Danny and Tyler teamed up to fix the gymnasium, which had taken heavy damage during the Iron Circle's attack. "You've got a knack for this," Tyler said, watching Danny expertly patch a hole in the wall. Danny laughed. "Spent enough time breaking things. Guess it's time I learned to fix them." By the week's end, the town held a celebration in the square. Clara's diner provided food, and local musicians played on a makeshift stage. Families gathered under strings of lights, their laughter and conversation filling the cool evening air. Bear stood at the edge of the crowd, a rare smile on his face. Marcus approached, holding 2 cups of cider. "You should let yourself enjoy this," Marcus said, handing Bear a cup. "I am," Bear replied, "just in my own way." Marcus chuckled. "You did good, Bear. We all did." As the night wore on, Bear found himself sitting with Tyler and Clara near the stage. "What happens if someone else tries to come after us?" Tyler asked. Bear's expression grew serious. "They'll think twice. And if they don't, we'll be ready." Clara nodded. "We've learned how to fight for each other. That's not something you can take away." The next morning, Bear walked through the town, taking in the sights of their progress. The boarded-up windows had been replaced, the streets were clean, and the people carried themselves with a quiet confidence. As he passed the diner, Clara stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. "Heading somewhere?" she asked. "Just taking a walk," Bear replied. "Making sure everything's as it should be." Clara smiled. "It is. Thanks to you." Bear shook his head. "Thanks to us." Later that day, Bear returned to the church, where Marcus was packing up the evidence they collected against the Iron Circle. "What are you doing with all that?" Bear asked. "Sending it to the state police," Marcus replied. "Even if Kane's gone, I want to make sure they don't come back." Bear nodded. "Good. Let's make sure they know we're not just sitting ducks." As the sun set on Pine Valley, Bear sat on his porch, watching the horizon. The battle had been hard-fought, but the victory belonged to the people. They had stood together, proving that even the darkest threats couldn't break their spirit. Tyler joined him, sitting on the steps. "You think this is it?" Tyler asked. "The end of the trouble?" Bear thought for a moment, then shook his head. "There's always going to be trouble, Tyler, but now we know how to face it, and we'll face it together." The two sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of a peaceful town filling the air. For the first time in a long time, Pine Valley felt like home again. And Bear Wallace knew that as long as they stood united, nothing could take that away.